Hi everyone, I trust you guys are doing great. In first episode, we spoke about education and sports law, and in this episode, we'll be talking about few insights in sports law and experiences of Ahana Mehrotra during her journey in sports law. If you could explain interrelation between entertainment, IP, and sports law, for the audience.
So, I mean, there's very little that is termed as just sports law. It's more about sports and the law. Sports law, particularly, is things like anti-doping, things like player transfers in the football industry specifically, and other things like disputes regarding sporting rules and regulations and issues of those nature. The rest of it that we do in the realm of sports law is more about the laws associated with a sporting event, or for that matter, sport in general. So, of course, there is a fair amount of intellectual property work involved, a fair amount of broadcasting work involved. I mean, every league today is highly dependent on their on the broadcast rights, right? So from that perspective, there is a huge mix of entertainment IP in the realm of sport. So even today, if I'm doing a sponsorship transaction, that's nothing but an intellectual property. I mean, at the end of the day, I just want the rights to be able to use somebody else's trademark. Or today, if I'm if I'm working on a league, I go to a Sony or a Star in India. That's nothing but a broadcasting contract. So I need to understand how broadcast works in terms of what happens in terms of how the producer first shoots the content,
Yeah.
then uplinks it, then the broadcaster downlinks it, how they add the advertisements to it, how the advertisements whole structuring works, what the selling is like, how the revenue model works, etc. So I mean, definitely, I mean, there's a whole lot of entertainment work that we do in any large scale tournament.
So, how was the transition like for you to, representing athlete from being an athlete? And do you think, having been an athlete yourself, it helped you to represent another athlete?
So of course, I mean, having been an athlete, you've been in those circumstances, right? And I mean, I've been extremely fortunate that my parents were extremely supportive, and that's what I said, right? I mean, while playing cricket, a lot of times the situation was that if we wanted better playing conditions in terms of not on the ground but off the ground. I mean,
Yeah.
if we want, we wanted to. It's not like we always had the luxury, but yes, having been to a premier boarding school, the school did facilitate a whole bunch of things like our travel was taken care of in a better manner or in better conditions. Our stays were ensured in better conditions or better manner. But it's not like we were away from the reality. And I guess that's the
Yeah.
reason at that point in time when I had to make the choice between pursuing cricket or for that matter, uh, studying law. I picked the latter simply because I knew at that point in time I didn't think that it had the kind of future in terms of monetary gains that law had. And
Yeah.
that was a practical decision back in the day. So that being said, I mean, I don't think I was ever though away from the reality. And of course, there were occasions, like I still remember, I think it was under 15 or under 13, I can't recall anymore, but basically sometime in the year 2001, it was that, we were returning from our nationals and we didn't
Yeah.
have booking uh, a train reservation. And we literally sat outside the third class bathroom compartment, like the third class compartment outside the bathroom and traveled all the way back to Ajmer. So, you do understand the space that the athlete is coming from, having been an athlete, or for that matter, the kind of troubles or the kind of hardships that are involved in terms of, they spend their, especially people who, like in my case, I didn't think that I wanted to take up sport professionally. But I do
Yeah.
understand that people who do decide to take sport up professionally at a young age, they give up a whole bunch of other things, right? They give
Yeah.
up their education, they decide to pursue education from open schools, etc. Where so they're getting jobs in other fields becomes a highly limited chance. So obviously, when an athlete comes to you, you know how hard they worked, and if they are facing an issue, of course, you don't want to. In talking of the anti-doping realm per se, you obviously don't want to encourage cheats in any manner whatsoever. Having been an athlete and having believed in fair play all my life, so you don't want to encourage somebody who is sort of destroying the true spirit of sport. But that being said, I mean, of course, there's a soft corner always for athletes. You understand the situation, you try and help them out. A lot of times back in the day when I used to represent athletes before the anti-doping tribunal, it used to be pro bono work largely. So, just
Okay.
doing small little things to be able to help them out. And like, of course, the big ticket case I did was the Sushil Kumar matter. So that was like a huge matter of pride, right? When
Yeah.
a legend of that stature comes to you and you get to represent them, then that becomes a different matter altogether in terms of it's a huge matter of pride, of, you're excited, you're in awe of a person who's done so well. I mean, at that point in time, I still remember. The case came to us literally overnight. I think it was like, say, about 15th or 16th of May, and we had to do our filings over the next couple of days, and then, I mean, of course, there were back-to-back hearings in court, but by, say, about June 2nd, the matter had wound up in court. But those 3 weeks, we literally perpetually lived out of office. So, but you're on such a high because, you
Yeah.
have, I mean, apart from the fact that just you have very high stakes involved. That being said, that I think because you are so much in awe of the person you're trying to stand up for and try to, fighting
Yeah.
for, that I think you get the energy to work from God knows where. Because I mean, I don't remember in those 3 weeks, I may not have slept for more than 2 hours on any given night, but it
Yeah.
was probably the best phase of my life. Look, those 3 weeks, I would go back to them any day. It's different that I'm much older now and I can't do as many sleepless nights.
Yeah. I was just gonna ask, with having 8 years of experience in sports law, can you share one such unforgettable case in which that impact in your journey in the field?
I mean, without a doubt, it's got to be that Sushil Kumar case, right? I mean, also that we were assisting Mr. Amit Sibbal, and the way he was also doing the matter pro bono, and which was, really gracious of him. But it was not like even for a moment he was less attached to the matter in terms of the kind of hard work that he was willing to put in. And every night, like, we would go to his office at about 7, 8 in the evening, and our conferences would begin, and we'd wind up around 10, 10:30, and he would give us a bunch of questions to research through the night. And by morning 5:30, you could already see a text from him on your phone saying, "What is the update on the questions I gave you?" So it was literally like we used to spend, all night researching, framing new strategies, getting him research from across the world in terms of how wrestling functions as a sport in other countries, how selections take place. And I mean, I was also really
Yeah.
fortunate. I mean, I was, of course, this is about 2016, so it was 4 years ago, and I was also fairly young in the profession that back in the day, but also that I had a super team of interns at that point in time. So without them, I don't think they brought in some fresh energy. They were always enthusiastic, always willing to, give it their best. We used to tell them overnight that, okay, tomorrow morning, one of you run to Chhatrasal Stadium. So they take a metro, go to Sushil first thing in the morning, things like that. And that sort of brought in new energy, zeal, because the whole team was so dedicated. So I guess for sure that was one of the most memorable experiences of my life, for sure.
Yeah, that's really great, and I'm sure that your passion for sports helped you to work so long in the day. Being the vice chairman of anti-doping disciplinary of India, what is your take on increasing doping cases and how lawyers help athletes and sports as a whole in this respect?
So for me, it's been an interesting switch, right? From representing athletes before the anti-doping tribunal to
Yeah,
now adjudicating upon anti-doping disputes. It's been an interesting shift. Because I know I've been on the other side, I also know, too bad for the athletes actually, but when I know that the athlete is trying to concoct a story, you
Mm,
know that the athlete is trying to do so, right? So I mean,
mm,
you're aware of the tricks of the trade. Let's see if I was to really put it in a layman terms, you really know if somebody's trying to cheat and make a false case. You do know that, and that's the reason. And like it was just I think it was last week that there was a case that was written about that I had adjudicated upon. So now that was a case of an athlete who practiced the sport of judo. Now I do understand the fact, having worked with Sushil Kumar, having understood, even though it was wrestling, but having understood that
yeah,
there are certain sports where the weight category is of relevance. So I do understand, and that was a case wherein the athlete had consumed a diuretic. So my first question to cross question the athlete, or to sort of ask, was that okay, you play judo, and diuretic is something that is used to reduce weight. Now, so you can draw that, sort of correlation between a particular drug and what the athlete has consumed, why he may have consumed it, or why he may not have consumed it. So definitely, I mean, having been on the other side, you do understand a lot more. Having played sport, you understand a lot more about what are some of the tricks that people use to gain that competitive advantage. Which is what I mean, when the 2015 WADA code amendment took place, the whole purpose of, the major amendment was that intentional cheats should be punished. And I guess that's the realm we are now working with, wherein there's when you see that the intent to cheat is present, is when you give a punishment of about 4 years to the athlete. And I think
yeah,
when you give a punishment for about 4 years to an athlete, it's as good as uh, an athlete's career coming to an end. So
yeah,
you're also carrying a huge responsibility on your head, in terms of the fact that, an athlete may have given up everything at the young age of say about 8, 10 to pursue a sport. And most of them come from really humble backgrounds. So obviously, they invest the little money that their parents make or whatever in that sport, with the dream that one day they will be able to, play for India, represent India, win that one
yeah,
Olympic medal, get that job in a sports quota, or the ministry
yeah,
will sort of give them some kind of remuneration in terms of prize money or whatever, simply because they've won a medal for the country, they've done the country
yeah,
proud. So obviously, I mean, you don't want to destroy somebody's career either, right? So I mean,
yeah.
you always have that pressure on your head in terms of, okay, what is the best that can be done in a given scenario, especially when there are lots of gray areas present. So it's also a huge responsibility that comes along when adjudicating upon a doping dispute. So that's what it is.
Is that ever happened with you while dealing with such case? You have got mental stress a lot, and while taking decision.
No, not so far, to be honest. I mean, I've extensively written in the past about doping issues, doping disputes, and I guess it's easier to comment on something as a third person. Uh, Fortunately or unfortunately, I haven't had a big ticket matter over the last 8 months of being on the panel, or about 10 months of being in the panel. I haven't had such a big ticket matter. So, I mean, the pressure is obviously lesser, and especially when an athlete is young, um, you know that, okay, even if 2 years are lost, he can probably practice through those 2 years and not much is going to be
Yeah.
lost. But the more tougher situation is when you have an older athlete who's already at the age of 26, 27, and then you put a 4 year ban. So that means that
Oh.
earliest he can compete is 31 or 30, 31. And that's when, and 99% of the times when you have a 4 year ban, you're going to miss the coming Olympics. So that
Oh.
obviously misses, puts you back several years. By then,
Yeah.
somebody young emerges in the sport, and your chances
Yeah.
become so. I mean, as I said, like it's a huge responsibility on your head. So that's and you have to be really cautious in terms of when adjudicating upon these disputes.
Okay. Your company, AM Sports Law, which works with various entities like federation, athletes, clubs, and leagues. what difference it is between working for a popular sports and lesser popular sports in terms of law as well as management.
I don't think there's any difference in terms of law, to be honest.
Okay.
It's more about the monetary gains as well as the I mean, at the end of it, it really just boils down to money, to be honest. I mean,
Yeah.
something like a cricket, everybody knows that, there are always very high stakes involved. And when there are high stakes involved, obviously, the way you structure your contracts, you got to be, I think it's not like you're exercising any less care when you're drafting another contract for another sport wherein there is not so much money involved or whatever. You're always fighting for your client's interests. So to the extent of, that's what I said, to the extent of law, it always remains the same. But of course, from the management perspective, obviously when there's more money involved, things are going to be more larger than life, right? So
Yeah.
because things are going to be larger than life, I mean, you'll have these extravagant performances, maybe as an opening ceremony, closing ceremony, all of that, or you know there are going to be cheerleaders involved or other things involved, and that's when the whole paraphernalia increases, the risk factor also increases. So those are some of the elements
Mm.
that come in. But otherwise, I mean, yeah, it just but I mean, today also non-popular sports can become popular sports, right? I mean, we've all seen it in the
Yeah.
case of kabaddi. So
Yeah.
wherein it was an absolute rural sport that picked up overnight just because it was presented in a certain manner on TV, and
Yeah.
it sort of got the popularity that it's managed to get, and it's improvised the life and living conditions of so many athletes out there. You know,
Yeah.
um, these kabaddi players who had sort of never in their lives stayed at a 5 star, or for that matter experienced those kind of facilities. They all got, and rightly so, right? I mean, they
Yeah.
worked hard on a sport. They've excelled at a sport, so why not? So I mean, I
Yeah.
think but so I would, that's what I'd say, that every sport needs to be looked upon in its own fashion.
Yeah.
And less popular sports are also trying to achieve the kind of popularity that cricket enjoys in the country. I
Yeah.
mean, I think football is working hard towards getting there. So I mean, at the end of the day, we're all striving to get to that same level as cricket, and it's not like the less popular sports eventually will not reach that rate of success or whatever.
A lot of sports leagues are emerging in India. What legal challenges do you face, and how viable are these leagues in India? Especially you being worked for multiple major leagues in India like IPL, ISL, Badminton League, and Ultimate Table Tennis League. Your experience might uh, help us to
So
understand it.
I haven't worked on the IPL. I was, still in law school when IPL began, and IPL
Okay.
has been solely worked upon by the IMG team in London, along with Nandan here in India. So
Yeah.
that's I can't ever take that credit away from him. So I'd like to clarify that first. That being said,
Yeah.
I mean, having worked on the lesser, especially the lesser popular sports that have now gained popularity, right? So legal challenge per se is, of course, to start with just the rights, negotiating the commercial rights with and getting the sanction from the federation. So you have to be extremely cautious. We experienced the issue that happened at the time of the Indian Badminton League. The federation and the commercial rights partner had a fallout, and eventually the federation went ahead and did their own version
Okay.
of the league in 2015 and started with the Premier Badminton League, because at that point in time
Yeah.
the name, the intellectual property in the name, the trademark Indian Badminton League belonged to the commercial rights owner, and they weren't
Yeah.
willing to part with it, and therefore they had to begin on a new name. Then we've of course seen disputes like what has happened with volleyball. Um, Recently, and that matter is sub judice at the moment. I mean, there is a case going on in the Delhi High Court. So, and then of course there is also some controversy that happened to do with the wrestling league, because uh, of course there's a pro wrestling league which happens at the national level, and
Yeah.
then Z went ahead and started the Maharashtra Kushti Dangal.
Mm.
So that was a state level thing. So what needed to be, I mean, studied in the contract that happened with the Wrestling Federation of India and the owners of the Pro Wrestling League was that what is the nature of exclusivity they had? Did they have exclusivity for state leagues as well or not? Was another entity allowed to do the state leagues? So what is the nature of the non-compete clause, etc., that they would have? So those are some of the legal challenges that come in but that being said, in terms of viability, I don't think a lot of people realize, and that's the reason that I think back in the day, I had done a study that from the time that the IPL started till about 2016, there had been about uh, 29 odd leagues that had started in India, and only seven had survived. So I think we've seen, despite hockey being the national sport, we've seen three iterations of the league, but none of them have been lasted or been successful. It's really
Yeah.
unfortunate. So of course, you need to be practical in terms of the kind of budgets that should be spent on a particular sport, the kind of revenue that you may be able to generate from that sport. I think the idea is to go, for non-popular sports or sports that are less popular, the idea is to go slow and to have that sustainability power. It's not, sport is not a overnight revenue earner, so to speak. It's a
Mm.
long-term investment which is going to give you returns only after a certain period of time, say 5 to 7 years. So you got to have the sustaining power to be able to incur the kind of expenses that it requires for a period of 5 to 7 years. A lot of people just, think it's an overnight thing. They will have enough money for one season and then not be able to generate money from the next season, and that's when things die out mostly after season
Yeah.
one. So that's what it is.
Okay. As a someone being in industry for so long time, what's your mantra for athletes, lawyers, and coaches about do's and don'ts while playing or representing any sport?
Wow, okay. That's quite a varied sect in terms of athletes and lawyers. You can't put them in the same bracket ever.
Yeah.
Um, that being said, I guess it's all about playing fair for an athlete, right? Giving it your best. Of course, we all say the reason that certain laws exist in the realm of sport, what really is sports law, is to ensure that everybody is placed on a level playing field. Once you're placed on a level playing field, I mean, obviously, play fair because I mean, I've always believed in that quote where they say that when the one great scorer comes to write against your name, they ask whether or not you won or lost, but how you played the game. So it is
Yeah.
really about how you play the game, right? So it is, I mean, give that your best. Feel proud that you're getting the opportunity to be able to represent your country, or for that matter, even your state, or at a smaller level, right? I mean, you're uh, working just as hard. I mean, we're in a country of 1.2 billion people. Obviously, there's a lot of competition to get to a certain place, and even small successes matter. That's what it is. And train hard, work hard, dream big. That's what it is for athletes. For coaches, I mean, they have a lot of influence on the life of an athlete, right?
Yeah.
I mean, apart from just I mean, if I was to talk in a personal context as well, apart from just my cricket coach, or for that matter, somebody who is purely related to me from a sporting perspective, I think it was really important, given that, I went to a boarding school, uh, the amount of time that I spent with my teachers in general, who were, they didn't sort of teach me in terms of sport, but even otherwise, the kind of lessons they gave me, or sort of, the kind of values they instilled in me, and that goes for parents too, right? So
Mm.
they are coaches in some way or the other. So the kind of, I mean, I think it's really important to be able to support the athlete psychologically. Today, more and more, I mean, even in a doping scenario, sometimes you come across cases wherein the athlete comes about and says, my coach told me to have this particular medicine, and that's the reason I had the
Okay.
particular medicine, right? So, because you place that trust in that person blindly, And if that is the nature of influence you have on a person, then you have a great amount of responsibility to be able to, live up to the kind of trust that has been put into you. So I think a coach, their mantra should really be, apart from just on ground training or for that matter, just working on the sport, also about the kind of mental support that you can give to the athlete and sort of instill the right sporting values in the athlete. As far as lawyers are concerned, I mean, of course, our job is to be able to educate athletes in terms of what the sporting regulations are, what are the do's, what are the don'ts, and to be able to help them fight for the right, even at the cost of sometimes. I mean, of course, I'm not going to say that the moment an athlete comes to you, as a lawyer, it's like you're duty bound to be working for an athlete pro bono. But I mean, at the cost of your, commercial advantage, or for that matter, just if you genuinely believe that there is, somebody is in the right, go out there and do your best to be able to support that person. That's what you can do
Yeah.
as a lawyer.
Yeah. One of our followers have asked, would you go against the spirit of sport to save the sports person's career if it comes to that, and how to decide yourself what morals and what not?
No, I mean, I don't think, I think somebody who's detached, who's not emotionally connected to sport, may have a more objective view to it. But because I am emotionally attached to sport, I mean, what you need to understand is that today, the reason sport thrives is simply because of the unpredictability of the result. I mean, the reason you and I sit and watch sport, a live sporting event, is simply because I don't know what the result in the end is going to be. That's the reason there is so much value to a live telecast versus a repeat. There's not, once I
Yeah.
already know the result, I am not going to be interested in watching that particular game. So that automatically affects my viewership, which then becomes a vicious circle. If viewership is affected, then you don't get as much advertising revenue, you don't make as much money, sponsorships get affected, and so on and so forth. Then you can't invest
Yeah.
as much money in sport, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, cheating, and that's the reason that people are so all these sporting federations out there in the world work so hard towards protecting sport from incidences like match fixing. So, I mean, today, if it's a similar situation, I mean, if it comes to a particular athlete where I know that somebody is cheating at the cost of their career, I don't think they deserve a chance. So, I mean, it's not a tough question at all. It's a no-brainer for me that
Yeah.
you can't endorse somebody who's trying to cheat in a sport.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining. It was a pleasure to have a chat with you. I'm sure lot of people who were at this live session must have taken away some of the other things from your life journey and the chat which we had. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Chinmay, for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I wish you guys all the best for your future endeavors. I hope to be back soon for something more.
Yeah, sure. Take care.
You too. Bye.